Welcome to Black Power Stories, where every story reminds us that true justice always finds its way. If you believe everyone deserves dignity, fairness, and respect, you're in the right place. Tell us where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another powerful story. The moment that tow truck touched her car, Officer Ryan Whitmore thought he was proving his power. He had no idea he was setting in motion the decision that would end his entire career. The street was quiet that Tuesday morning in downtown Richmond, Virginia. The golden sunlight reflected off glass buildings. Cars moved slowly through the intersection, and people walked past carrying coffee cups and briefcases, unaware that a simple parking dispute was about to become something much bigger. Victoria Caldwell stood beside her black sedan, watching as the tow truck driver prepared to remove her vehicle from the curb. She did not shout. She did not argue. She simply watched. Her calmness was the one thing that seemed to bother Officer Ryan Whitmore the most. "You should have thought about the rules before leaving your car here," he said, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who believed the conversation was already over. Victoria looked at the temporary sign near the sidewalk, then back at the officer. "I believe there may be a misunderstanding," she replied calmly. But Ryan had already made up his mind. To him, this was not about a misunderstanding. It was about control. For years, Ryan Whitmore had built a reputation around being the officer who never backed down. He believed a badge gave him authority in every situation. He believed people should accept his decisions without question. And on that morning, standing across from a black woman in a professional suit who calmly challenged him, he saw someone he thought he could dismiss. What he did not know was that Victoria Caldwell was not just another person trying to recover her vehicle. She was the district attorney responsible for reviewing cases involving police conduct throughout the county. But she never mentioned her title. She never reached for her phone to make a call. She never used her position to intimidate him. Because Victoria had learned something throughout her years in the justice system. The truth does not need to announce itself. It only needs the right moment to be heard. Imagine standing there, watching someone with authority treat you as if your voice does not matter. Imagine feeling the frustration of knowing that arguing would only give them exactly what they expected. Victoria understood that feeling. She had spent her career fighting for people who felt powerless, people who believed no one would listen. That was why she remained silent. She was not afraid. She was observing. Every word, every decision, every detail. Ryan smiled as the tow truck slowly lifted her car. He believed the situation was finished. He believed he had won a small victory. But he did not realize that some moments are not endings. Some moments are evidence. And as Victoria watched her car disappear down the street, she quietly remembered every second of what happened. Because sometimes the person who says the least is the person who understands the most. Ryan Whitmore thought he had towed away a car. He did not realize he had just opened the door to the case that would change everything. The next morning, the city continued moving as if nothing unusual had happened. People rushed into offices, buses traveled along familiar routes, and the noise of everyday life covered the quiet beginning of a story that would soon reach every corner of the county. But inside the Richmond County District Attorney's office, Victoria Caldwell was already reviewing the details of the previous day. She sat behind her desk surrounded by case files, legal documents, and reports that represented years of work dedicated to one simple idea. Justice only works when everyone is treated equally. To most people, Victoria's position represented authority, but she never viewed it that way. She saw it as responsibility. Growing up in a neighborhood where many people felt unheard, Victoria learned early that power was not about making others feel small. True power was about protecting those who had no one standing beside them. That belief shaped every decision she made. It was also the reason she stayed silent when Officer Ryan Whitmore ordered her car to be towed. She knew the moment was bigger than herself. It was not just about a vehicle sitting on a city street. It was about how easily a person could use authority without considering the impact of their choices. Across town, Ryan Whitmore arrived at the police station with the same confidence he carried every day. To him, the previous encounter was already forgotten. He joked with coworkers, reviewed routine paperwork, and moved through the building believing nothing could challenge him. He had seen complaints before. He had seen people question his decisions before. In his mind, those moments always passed. What Ryan did not understand was that Victoria was different. She was not looking for an argument. She was not looking for attention. She was looking for the truth. Later that afternoon, Victoria contacted Marcus Reed, one of the attorneys working with her office. She did not ask him to attack Ryan. She did not ask him to create a public scene. She simply asked one question. What happens when someone with authority forgets that authority has limits? Marcus understood immediately. This was not about personal anger. It was about accountability. They began collecting the information surrounding the incident. The parking records, the official notes, the timeline, the statements from people who had witnessed the interaction. Piece by piece, the picture became clearer. The more they looked, the more they realized the situation was not as simple as Ryan believed. Meanwhile, Ryan continued his normal routine, unaware that the woman he had dismissed was carefully examining every decision he made. He believed the badge on his chest ended the conversation. He did not realize that every choice made by someone in power leaves a record, and records have a way of speaking when people refuse to listen. Victoria looked through the documents one more time before closing the file. She knew the road ahead would not be easy. She knew people would question her motives. They would ask why she cared so much about one incident. But she also knew something Ryan had forgotten. Justice is not measured by how powerful someone appears. It is measured by whether the truth can stand when the power disappears. The morning rain covered Richmond with a soft gray sky, turning the streets outside the county offices into a quiet reflection of the city itself. Inside the district attorney's office, Victoria Caldwell continued working through the details that most people would have considered a small disagreement. But Victoria knew better. Small moments often revealed the biggest problems. She had spent years studying the way decisions were made, the way authority was used, and the way ordinary people were affected when someone in power stopped listening. Her office was not built on anger. It was built on facts. Every document mattered. Every statement mattered. Every choice mattered. That was why she refused to react emotionally when Officer Ryan Whitmore dismissed her concerns the day before. She knew that frustration could disappear, but evidence remained. Across the city, Ryan walked into the police station carrying the same confidence he always had. The familiar sounds of phones ringing, keyboards clicking, and officers moving through the halls surrounded him. To everyone around him, he looked like someone completely certain of himself. He believed the situation with Victoria was nothing more than another routine interaction. In his mind, the matter was already finished. But there was something Ryan did not understand. A person can ignore a conversation, but they cannot ignore the truth forever. Later that week, Victoria met with Marcus Reed in a quiet conference room inside the district attorney's office. Marcus had worked with her long enough to understand her approach. She never rushed toward a conclusion. She never searched for a dramatic moment. She searched for accuracy. What do the records tell us? Victoria asked. Marcus placed the information on the table and began reviewing the timeline. The details slowly connected. The official explanation. The circumstances surrounding the decision. The statements from witnesses who had watched the situation unfold. Nothing was overlooked. Victoria listened carefully, making notes as the room remained quiet. She understood that the most important part of justice was patience. Meanwhile, Ryan continued his daily routine without realizing that the situation was changing around him. He spoke confidently with coworkers and treated the incident as a simple disagreement. He still believed that his position gave him the final word. He did not see the questions forming behind the scenes. He did not see the careful review taking place. He did not understand that accountability often arrives quietly before it becomes impossible to ignore. As the days passed, Victoria discovered more about the pattern of decisions surrounding Ryan's actions. It was not about one person or one moment. It was about understanding whether someone with authority had forgotten the responsibility that came with it. Victoria closed another folder and looked out the office window at the city below. She knew the next steps would require courage, because truth is not always comfortable for the people who need to hear it most. But she also knew something that had guided her entire career. The strongest form of justice is not found in anger. It is found in the moment when facts become impossible to deny. The city of Richmond moved through another ordinary day, but behind the walls of the district attorney's office, the details of one quiet encounter were beginning to reveal a much larger picture. Victoria Caldwell sat at her desk reviewing the information once again, not because she doubted what happened, but because she understood the importance of every decision that followed. A person in her position could easily make a statement based on emotion, but Victoria had built her entire career on something stronger. Evidence, facts, truth. Across town, Officer Ryan Whitmore continued wearing the same confidence he had carried for years. He arrived at the station, greeted familiar faces, and moved through his day believing nothing had changed. To him, the incident with Victoria was nothing more than a disagreement with someone who questioned his authority. He never considered that his actions might be examined beyond that single moment. He never considered that the person standing in front of him was someone who understood the law better than almost anyone in the city. But Victoria was not interested in proving that she was more powerful than Ryan. She was interested in proving that everyone, regardless of position, should be held to the same standard. Later that afternoon, Marcus Reed continued reviewing additional information connected to the incident. He noticed something important. The situation was not only about what happened on that street. It was about the choices made before, during, and after the encounter. Every decision created a trail. Every report created a record. Every interaction told a story. People often think the biggest mistakes happen in dramatic moments, Marcus said quietly. But sometimes they happen when someone believes nobody is paying attention. Victoria looked over the documents in front of her. She knew that statement was true. The most dangerous moments in public service were not always the obvious ones. Sometimes they were the quiet decisions made by people who believed their position protected them from consequences. Meanwhile, Ryan began hearing small questions from inside the department. Nothing serious yet. Just conversations. Just people wondering why certain details did not match the official explanation. He dismissed them easily. He believed questions would disappear the same way they always had before. But this time was different. The person asking those questions was not someone looking for conflict. She was someone looking for accountability. As evening approached, Victoria left her office and walked through the quiet hallway of the building. She passed framed photographs of past leaders, reminders of the responsibility carried by those who serve the public. She stopped for a moment and looked at them. To her, justice was never about winning against another person. It was about making sure the system worked the way it was supposed to work. Outside, the city lights began shining across Richmond. Somewhere across town, Ryan Whitmore still believed he had handled a simple situation. He did not know that the moment he chose to ignore another person's voice, he created a question that demanded an answer. And soon, that answer would come not from anger, but from the one thing no badge could silence, the truth. The following morning, a different feeling settled over the Richmond County District Attorney's office. Nothing had changed on the surface. People still walked through the hallways carrying folders. Phones continued ringing, and the city outside continued moving at its usual pace. But inside Victoria Caldwell's office, the weight of the situation was becoming clearer. The question was no longer only about what happened on that street. The question was whether someone with authority had forgotten the responsibility that came with it. Victoria sat with Marcus Reed and reviewed the final pieces of information they had gathered. The witness statements, the official records, the timeline of events. Every detail mattered. Every moment told part of the story. We need to be certain, Victoria said. Not because he deserves a chance to avoid accountability, but because justice deserves accuracy. Marcus nodded. He had worked with Victoria long enough to know that she never moved forward based on assumptions. She believed the strongest cases were not built on emotion. They were built on facts that could stand on their own. Across the city, Officer Ryan Whitmore noticed something different happening around him. Conversations became quieter when he entered a room. People who once ignored questions were beginning to pay attention. He could feel that something had changed, but he could not identify exactly what it was. Ryan still believed the situation was under control. He still believed the incident would disappear like every other uncomfortable moment from his past. But confidence can sometimes become a person's greatest weakness when it prevents them from seeing what is happening around them. At the police station, Ryan looked through routine paperwork and continued his normal schedule. He spoke with co-workers, answered calls, and acted as though nothing unusual had happened. But behind the scenes, questions were being asked. Not rumors. Not accusations without proof. Questions supported by information. Questions that needed answers. Victoria understood that moments like this often revealed character. Anyone could act responsibly when everything was easy. The true test came when someone believed nobody was watching. She remembered Ryan's expression when he dismissed her concerns. She remembered the certainty in his voice. She remembered the way he acted as if the conversation was already finished. But Victoria also remembered something else. She remembered staying calm. She remembered choosing patience over anger. Because she knew that reacting in the moment would only create noise. Waiting for the truth created something much stronger. As the afternoon continued, Marcus placed another document on the table. It connected the details more clearly than before. The situation was becoming impossible to ignore. Victoria looked at the information quietly, knowing the next steps would change everything. She did not feel satisfaction. She did not feel victory. She only felt the responsibility of making sure the process was fair. Meanwhile, Ryan Whitmore continued believing that the badge beside his name was enough protection. He did not understand that authority is not measured by how many people obey it. Authority is measured by how carefully it is used. And soon, he would discover that the person he underestimated was not searching for revenge. She was searching for justice. The days that followed became a quiet battle between confidence and truth. There were no dramatic announcements, no public confrontation, only a careful process unfolding behind closed doors. Inside the Richmond County District Attorney's office, Victoria Caldwell continued reviewing the information connected to the incident. She understood that every step forward had to be measured. A single mistake could allow someone to question the entire purpose of seeking accountability. That was why she remained focused. She was not trying to prove that she had authority. She was trying to prove that authority itself must always answer to the same rules. Marcus Reed spent hours organizing the collected information. He reviewed the timeline again and again, making sure every detail matched. The tow request, the official notes, the witness observations, the statements made during the interaction. Slowly, the picture became clearer. What first appeared to be one uncomfortable encounter had become a question about decision-making and responsibility. The strongest truth is the one that can survive every question, Marcus said as he placed the final documents on the table. Victoria looked at the pages in silence. She knew he was right. Facts did not need exaggeration. They did not need anger. They simply needed to be presented. Meanwhile, Officer Ryan Whitmore noticed the attention around him growing. A few co-workers had started asking about the situation. Some wanted to understand why certain details seemed different from the original explanation. Ryan answered confidently, convinced that the questions would eventually disappear. He believed the matter was being made larger than it needed to be. He believed people would move on. But Ryan had made one mistake. He assumed that because something happened quickly, it would also be forgotten quickly. He did not understand that certain moments stay alive because they reveal something important about how people use power. One afternoon, Victoria visited the department's records office to review additional information. The atmosphere was different from what she had expected. People recognized her, but she did not introduce herself by her title. She did not want special treatment. She wanted the same access and respect that any person seeking answers should receive. As she walked through the records room, she noticed something familiar. The same patterns appeared again and again throughout history. A person with authority makes a decision. Someone questions it. The person with authority assumes the conversation is over. But sometimes that is only the beginning. Later that evening, Victoria sat at home, reviewing her notes. She thought about the people she had represented throughout her career. People who did not have connections. People who did not know which doors to open or which questions to ask. They depended on someone believing that their voice mattered. That was why this case mattered. It was not because a car was moved from one location to another. It was because a person's dignity should never depend on weather. Someone in power chooses to respect it. Across the city, Ryan Whitmore ended his shift believing he had handled another ordinary situation. He had no idea that the quiet review happening behind the scenes was creating a case built not on emotion, but on evidence. And evidence has a way of finding the truth, even when people believe they have already closed the door. The investigation moved forward quietly, but the truth was becoming harder to ignore. In Richmond, most people continued their daily routines without knowing that a simple encounter on a city street was beginning to reveal a much deeper question about responsibility and trust. Inside the district attorney's office, Victoria Caldwell remained focused on the details. She knew that moments like this were not decided by emotions or public attention. They were decided by the strength of the facts. Marcus Reed continued organizing the information, carefully reviewing every piece connected to the incident. He compared statements, checked records, and followed the timeline from beginning to end. The more he reviewed, the more important one detail became. The situation had not been created by confusion alone. It had been shaped by choices. Sometimes the most important evidence is not what someone says, Marcus explained. It is what they choose to do when they believe nobody will challenge them. Victoria listened carefully. She understood that idea better than anyone. Throughout her career, she had seen how quickly ordinary people could feel powerless when facing someone with authority. A badge, a title, or a position could create distance between people. But the law was never meant to create a wall between those who serve and those they serve. It was meant to create responsibility. Meanwhile, Ryan Whitmore continued believing that his actions would never become a serious issue. He spoke confidently with colleagues and treated the situation as another example of someone questioning his judgment. He did not see himself as someone who needed to explain his decisions. He saw himself as someone who had already given the answer. But outside his own perspective, the story was changing. The witness who had observed the interaction agreed to provide a formal statement. The records created a clearer timeline. The details that once seemed disconnected began forming a complete picture. None of it happened overnight. There was no single dramatic moment. Instead, the truth was built piece by piece, like a puzzle slowly coming together. One evening, Victoria returned to her office after most employees had already left. The building was quiet, with only the soft sounds of distant footsteps and the hum of the lights above. She looked through the documents one more time. She thought about Ryan. She thought about the moment he decided not to listen. She thought about how easily a person could mistake silence for weakness. But Victoria knew the difference. Silence could be patience. Silence could be preparation. Silence could be someone waiting for the right moment to let the truth speak. Across town, Ryan finished another shift believing the matter was behind him. He believed the situation had ended the moment his tow request was completed. What he did not understand was that some decisions continue long after the moment they are made. Some actions create consequences that appear slowly, quietly, and without warning. And as Victoria closed the file on her desk, she knew the next stage would no longer be about what happened on that street. It would be about whether the system was willing to face what the evidence revealed. The following week brought a shift that Ryan Whitmore could feel, but could not fully understand. The city continued moving as usual, but inside the police department, conversations that once disappeared quickly were now being replaced by careful questions. People were no longer simply accepting explanations. They were looking closer. They were paying attention. Ryan noticed the change in the atmosphere when he walked through the station. The confidence he carried every day remained on the outside, but a small uncertainty had started growing. He wondered why a situation he considered insignificant was receiving so much attention. In his mind, he had followed procedure. He had made a decision. He believed that should have been the end of it. But the difference between authority and accountability was something Ryan had never truly considered. Across town, Victoria Caldwell continued preparing the next steps. She knew that the most difficult part of seeking justice was often not discovering the truth. It was making sure the truth was heard. She sat with Marcus Reed in another review meeting, examining the information one more time. The documents were organized. The timeline was clear. The statements supported the same conclusion. Nothing was based on assumptions. Nothing was based on personal feelings. "We have to remember what this is really about," Victoria said. "It is not about one person winning and another person losing. It is about whether the same standards apply to everyone." Marcus looked at the information in front of him and understood exactly what she meant. This was not a personal disagreement anymore. It had become a question about trust in the system. Meanwhile, Ryan began making his own preparations. He believed the situation was being misunderstood. He spoke with people who supported his version of events and convinced himself that the matter would eventually fade away. He focused on defending his actions instead of understanding their impact. That was the mistake that changed everything. Ryan believed the only question was whether he had broken a rule. He did not consider the larger question. What happens when someone with authority makes another person feel like their voice does not matter? As Victoria reviewed the final details, she remembered the quiet moment beside her car. She remembered how many people had watched without saying anything. She remembered how easily a person could be ignored when facing someone who believed they had complete control. That moment stayed with her because she had seen it before. Not in the exact same way, but in the same pattern. Someone with power makes a decision. Someone without power is expected to accept it. And the truth is left waiting for someone to speak. Later that evening, Ryan left the station believing he was still in control. He believed his position protected him. He believed the situation would eventually disappear. But he did not know that the most important moments were happening away from his view. The records were being reviewed. The facts were being organized. The questions were becoming stronger. And soon, Ryan would face the one thing he never expected. Not an argument, not a confrontation, but a carefully prepared case built entirely on the choices he had made when he thought nobody would challenge him. The morning arrived with a sense of anticipation across Richmond. Nothing looked different from the outside. Cars moved through the streets, businesses opened their doors, and people continued with their daily routines. But inside the Richmond County District Attorney's office, the situation had reached a turning point. Victoria Caldwell and Marcus Reed knew they had gathered enough information to move forward. The question was no longer whether the details mattered. The question was whether the truth would finally receive the attention it deserved. Victoria sat quietly in the conference room, looking over the final documents. She had spent years inside the justice system, and she knew that every case carried a responsibility. A person's position could never determine whether they deserved fairness. The law had to work the same way for everyone. Marcus placed the final report on the table. It contained the timeline of events, witness statements, and records that explained what happened that day. Everything connects, he said. There are no missing pieces. Victoria nodded slowly. She understood what that meant. The facts were no longer hidden inside separate documents. They had become a complete story. Across the city, Ryan Whitmore received a request to meet with department officials. When he entered the room, he expected another routine conversation. He believed he would simply explain his actions and move on. He still carried the confidence of someone who believed his decisions were automatically correct. But the atmosphere was different. The people sitting across from him were not asking for excuses. They were asking questions. Simple questions. Questions about judgment. Questions about responsibility. Questions about why the situation happened the way it did. Ryan answered with certainty. He explained that he believed he had followed his understanding of the rules. He focused on the procedure. He focused on his authority. But as the conversation continued, something became clear. The issue was not only what he had done. It was the attitude behind the decision. It was the belief that another person's concerns could simply be ignored. Meanwhile, Victoria prepared for the next stage. She knew the public would eventually hear about the situation, and she knew many people would focus on the surface details. But she wanted them to understand something deeper. This was never only about a vehicle. It was about the relationship between power and responsibility. It was about whether people trusted those who were supposed to protect fairness. That evening, Victoria walked through the quiet halls of her office one final time before leaving. She paused beside the shelves filled with years of legal work and remembered why she chose this profession. Not because it was easy, not because every decision was popular, but because someone had to stand for the idea that truth mattered. Ryan Whitmore left his meeting believing he had explained everything. He believed his words had solved the problem. He did not realize that explanations could not replace accountability. The process had already moved forward. The evidence had already been reviewed. And soon, the public would learn what happens when someone mistakes authority for being untouchable. The courtroom was quiet before anyone spoke. Outside the building, the city continued moving, unaware that inside those walls, a decision was about to reveal the difference between power and responsibility. Victoria Caldwell sat at the table with Marcus Reed beside her, surrounded by carefully organized documents. She did not look like someone searching for revenge. She looked like someone carrying a responsibility. Every page represented a choice. Every statement represented a moment that needed to be understood. Across the room, Ryan Whitmore sat with a confidence that had not disappeared. He believed he was prepared. He believed he knew what would happen next. For him, this was still a disagreement that had become larger than necessary. He expected explanations to end the conversation. But he was about to discover that facts do not disappear simply because someone refuses to acknowledge them. The hearing began with a review of the events. The details were presented clearly and without exaggeration. The timeline, the records, the witness statements. Each piece added another layer to the story. Victoria remained calm as she listened. She knew that the strongest moments in a courtroom were often the quiet ones. The moments when evidence spoke louder than emotion. Ryan listened carefully, waiting for the moment when he believed he could explain everything away. He repeated that he had followed procedure. He explained that he believed he had made the correct decision. But the questions continued. Not about whether he had the authority to make decisions. The questions were about how that authority was used. The room became quieter as the focus shifted. This was no longer only about what happened on a single street. It was about a pattern of judgment. It was about the responsibility that comes with wearing a badge and representing the public. Victoria finally spoke. Her voice was calm, steady, and respectful. She did not attack Ryan. She did not try to embarrass him. Instead, she explained why the situation mattered. When people believe their position places them above questions, trust begins to disappear, she said. Those words changed the atmosphere in the room, because everyone understood the meaning behind them. The issue was never just one decision. It was about what that decision represented. Marcus presented additional information that showed the importance of reviewing the situation carefully. The documents revealed inconsistencies that could no longer be ignored. Ryan looked through the information, and for the first time, the confidence on his face began to change. The person he had dismissed as just another citizen had not been reacting emotionally. She had been preparing with patience and purpose. As the hearing continued, Victoria looked around the room. She saw people listening more closely than before. She saw the attention shifting from assumptions to facts. And in that moment, she knew the process was working. Justice was not about one person defeating another. It was about making sure the truth had a place to stand. Ryan Whitmore had spent years believing that authority meant having the final word. But now he was learning a lesson that every person in power eventually faces. A badge may represent responsibility, but only integrity gives it meaning. The days after the hearing brought a different atmosphere to Richmond. The conversation was no longer limited to one department or one office. People across the city began asking questions about responsibility, trust, and the role of those who hold public authority. Inside the district attorney's office, Victoria Caldwell continued working with the same focus she had shown from the beginning. She knew that moments like this could easily become about personalities, but she refused to let that happen. The purpose was never to create a public victory. The purpose was to make sure the truth was recognized. Marcus Reed reviewed the final legal documents before the next stage began. The information was complete. The timeline was clear. The evidence showed a pattern of decisions that needed to be addressed. This is bigger than one interaction, Marcus said. People need to understand why accountability matters. Victoria looked through the report carefully. She understood exactly what he meant. A single decision can reveal how someone views their responsibility. It can show whether they see authority as a privilege or as a duty. Across town, Ryan Whitmore began to realize that the situation had become something he could no longer simply explain away. The confidence he once carried so easily had started to fade. He began reading the same documents that others had reviewed. He began seeing the details that he had ignored before. The records were not focused on personal opinions. They were focused on actions and choices. For the first time, Ryan had to consider the possibility that the issue was not only about what he believed he had done correctly. It was about how his decisions affected someone else. Meanwhile, Victoria prepared for the legal process ahead. She spoke with her team about the importance of staying focused on facts. She reminded them that justice required discipline. Emotions could be strong, but the truth had to remain stronger. The next meeting brought together officials, legal representatives, and community members who wanted answers. The room was filled with quiet attention. Everyone understood that the discussion represented something larger than one person. It represented the expectations placed on anyone who serves the public. Victoria addressed the room with a calm voice. She explained that accountability was not about punishment for the sake of punishment. It was about learning from mistakes and ensuring that trust could be rebuilt. Her words carried through the room because they came from experience, not anger. Ryan listened as the discussion continued. He saw that the situation was no longer about defending a single decision. It was about understanding the impact of that decision. The person he once believed he could dismiss had never been powerless. She had simply chosen patience over reaction. As the meeting ended, Victoria gathered her documents and prepared to leave. She knew the process was not finished yet, but she also knew something important had already changed. The truth had been heard. The questions had been asked, and the system was beginning to respond. Ryan Whitmore once believed that being in control meant having the final answer. But now he was discovering that real accountability begins when someone is willing to listen. The final stage of the case arrived with a quiet intensity that everyone in Richmond could feel. There were no dramatic moments, no sudden announcements, only the steady movement of a process that had been built on facts, patience, and careful review. Inside the courtroom, Victoria Caldwell sat with Marcus Reed as the final details were presented. She looked calm, just as she had from the beginning. She understood that this moment was not about proving that she was more powerful than Ryan Whitmore. It was about proving that power itself must always answer to responsibility. Ryan sat across the room, listening as the information was reviewed one final time. The confidence he once carried so easily had changed. He no longer saw the situation as a simple disagreement. He was beginning to understand that every decision made by someone in authority can create consequences beyond the moment itself. The legal discussion focused on the facts, the records, the statements, the choices made along the way. Nothing was exaggerated. Nothing was added for emotion. The truth was strong enough on its own. Victoria spoke about the importance of trust between public servants and the communities they serve. She explained that people do not judge systems only by written rules. They judge them by how those rules are applied. A system becomes stronger when it can recognize mistakes and correct them. The room remained silent as everyone listened. Marcus presented the final information that connected the entire timeline. The decision that started everything was no longer viewed as an isolated moment. It represented a larger conversation about fairness and accountability. Ryan looked through the documents in front of him. For the first time, he saw the situation from a different perspective. He saw how a person could feel ignored when someone with authority refused to listen. He saw how a simple decision could affect someone's confidence in the system itself. Outside the courtroom, people gathered to follow the outcome. Many expected anger or celebration, but Victoria showed something different. She showed restraint. She showed that justice did not require humiliation. It required honesty. When the final decision was announced, the consequences were clear. Ryan Whitmore's actions had damaged the trust expected from someone in his position, and the process that followed reflected the seriousness of that responsibility. His future in law enforcement was no longer the same. But Victoria did not see the result as a personal victory. She saw it as a reminder that accountability exists for a reason. Later that evening, Victoria returned to her office and placed the completed case file on her desk. She looked at it quietly, thinking about everything that had happened since that day on the street. One moment, one decision, one person choosing not to listen. It all became a reminder of a simple truth. Authority can create influence, but only integrity creates respect. Ryan Whitmore thought the badge gave him the final word. In the end, the truth had the final say. Months later, Richmond had returned to its familiar rhythm. The streets were busy, the courthouse halls were filled with people moving between hearings, and the city continued forward. But for many who remembered what happened, the story of Victoria Caldwell and Ryan Whitmore remained a powerful reminder of what happens when authority is separated from responsibility. Victoria continued her work as district attorney with the same dedication she had always shown. She returned to the same office, the same files, and the same mission that guided her throughout her career. She never saw the outcome as a personal victory. To her, it was simply another moment where the system was asked to answer an important question: does justice truly apply to everyone? Marcus Reed often thought back to the beginning of the case. A simple moment on a quiet street had revealed something much larger. It had shown how quickly a person could be overlooked when someone in power believed their position made them untouchable. But it also showed something else. It showed that patience, truth, and integrity could create change without anger or revenge. One afternoon, Victoria walked through the courthouse and noticed a group of young professionals visiting the building. They were learning about the justice system and the responsibilities carried by those who work inside it. She paused for a moment and watched them. She remembered why she chose this path years ago. She remembered the belief that every person deserved to be heard. Every person deserved respect. Every person deserved a fair opportunity to tell their story. Meanwhile, Ryan Whitmore faced the consequences of the choices he had made. The position he once viewed as permanent was gone. The confidence that came from believing he would never be challenged had been replaced by a difficult lesson. The world had shown him something he had ignored for too long. A person's title does not determine their worth, and a person's authority does not remove their responsibility. Looking back, the most important moment was not when the case reached its conclusion. It was the moment Victoria decided to remain calm when she could have reacted with anger. It was the moment she chose evidence instead of emotion. It was the moment she allowed the truth to speak for itself. Because real justice does not need to be loud. It does not need to seek attention. It simply needs to stand firm. Years from now, people might forget the details of one vehicle, one street, or one decision. But they will remember the lesson behind it. Power without responsibility creates distance. Authority without humility creates damage. But when truth is protected and dignity is respected, justice has a way of finding its path. Victoria Caldwell never needed to prove that she was powerful. She proved something far more important. She proved that the strongest voice is sometimes the one that remains calm while waiting for the truth to be heard. And in the end, the badge that Ryan believed gave him control could not protect him from the one thing no one can outrun forever: accountability.